Hey guys, so we just got a new season of the Circle US, that being season 5, and I thought it was okay. Now, at the end of the day, I still think it's a largely similar season to that of other seasons of the Circle, to where I was a bit underwhelmed. Plus, it had a lot of the same issues that I have with other seasons of the Circle that definitely harmed my enjoyment. Although compared to season 4, I actually enjoyed it a bit more, but we'll get more into that in a bit. So as usual with my reviews, I like to divide them into several sections, one talking about the cast, another talking about production decisions / editing, and another section talking about the gameplay. But let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the review. So first up, I wanted to talk a bit about the cast, and for the most part, I actually felt like this was one of the better casts for the Circle, and certainly a step up from season 4. But if we're going through them in order, first we have Brian, aka Brittany, who was definitely interesting to a degree. Now I feel like he was definitely harmed by playing as a catfish, where despite him coming off as someone that knows the strategy and wanted to play strategically, I feel like through him being a catfish, he really harmed his potential, and he probably didn't want to reveal too much for fear of being exposed as a catfish, but by doing so, he didn't really build enough bombs just to keep himself safe. However, I feel like he was an interesting character nonetheless. Next up, we have Billie Jean, aka Bruno, and she's another one who probably should have played as herself, actually even more so than Brian. However, I feel like she was less compelling as a character compared to Brian, so she didn't do too much for me. Next up, we have Shuby, who obviously played as a catfish here and was a season 1 character, and he was definitely a highlight of the season for me, where it was interesting seeing him playing as his catfish, despite him being very bad at it, and it was interesting seeing him trying to play the strategic game by trying to rally the new players against the originals, only for that to completely blow up in his face. And it was just a really fun rise and fall, just seeing him completely blow up his game at every opportunity to where he is eventually taken out. Next up, we have Marvin, who was another standout for this cast, largely due to him originally being part of the BB24 cast, only to be pulled due to him being on multiple shows, including America's Got Talent, as well as this show. And he was very entertaining to watch, watching him play this game, watching him trying to balance like the showmances between Raven and later with Tamira, only for it to eventually blow up his game. But I still really enjoy him nonetheless, and I kind of wish we had gotten him on Big Brother so that we could have gotten more screen time out of him. But as it is, he was definitely a highlight for me. Next up, we have Tom, who was okay. I mean, I can't say he was the greatest character in the world, but he wasn't boring either. He was one of the more strategically minded players, and while I feel like he definitely has some flaws with this game, it was still interesting seeing his arc over the season. Next up, we have Oliver, and Oliver was another fun character. Now, I do feel like he got hampered by him being a late entry, so we didn't quite get him as much as we probably would have otherwise, but still, he was a fun character nonetheless. Next up, we have Xanthi, who is your pretty standard first boot. I actually felt like coming into it that she would have been another Parker from season 4. However, once this twist comes in where she ends up playing the game with Brett as Jennifer, I do feel like she steps it up a bit, although I feel like she still got a bit overshined by Brett, which leads us right into Brett, who is another standout for me, largely due to, again, him being a Big Brother player. And admittedly, I feel like compared to Marvin and Shuby, he wasn't quite as interesting, though he was one of these more strategic players, and it was interesting hearing him talking strategy, and it's really good that we got to see him play throughout the entire season as Jennifer, as we got to see him try to navigate the game, and while it doesn't end up working out by the end of it, he was still an interesting presence for me. Next up, we have Tasia, aka Tamira, and she was probably the biggest dud for me on this cast. I didn't really connect super well with her, as she didn't really get too much screen time, and she didn't really make too much of an impact entertainment-wise, although she was largely responsible for the Marvin situation playing out, so I guess there's that. Next up, there's Raven, who was a pretty notable character as well. She was very likable and very much a major presence on the season, so I feel like she was a positive addition as well. Next up, we have the runner-up in Chaz, and Chaz was another pretty interesting character and a very good player as well, where it was interesting seeing him dominate the game for a lot of it and coming relatively close to winning, unlike these other players like Nick. Now granted, he does talk a lot about honesty and being more open with people, which was a bit annoying. I kind of wish we got more outright strategic talk from him, but on the whole, he was still a pretty likable presence. And then we had the winner in Sam, who was a pretty good character as well. Again, she does get a bit overshadowed by certain other characters, but as it is, she had a pretty fun arc over the course of the season, and plus she was pretty likable. So on the whole, I actually found this cast to be relatively strong, and while I can't say it measures quite up to the cast from season 1 or season 3, but I still found it to be a mostly likable and entertaining cast with its fair share of standouts. Next, I want to talk a bit about the production / presentation, and for the most part, I found this to be a pretty standard season of The Circle. Now, I do have some of the same issues I have with other seasons, like the fact that it has this Netflix style model where they're just dropping episodes all at once, which encourages binging, and again, it's the same thing with dropping 4 episodes a week. And while it's not as bad as The Traders, which literally released the entire season at once, I still found this format to be not ideal, as I don't like sitting down and watching all these episodes all at once. I rather have them be a bit more spaced out. So I'm also not a huge fan of the twist during the first round where 2 players are automatically blocked at the beginning due to first impressions, which obviously leads to Brett and Xanthi getting blocked and having to play as Jennifer, where it's not as bad as certain other twists where they would just be out of the game. I am glad they were at least still getting to be part of the game. However, I would have liked it a bit better if the 2 of them got to be more individual for longer, and if there had been an actual deliberation during that round between the influencers. There's also the follower challenge after Tamira and Shubi come into the game, which was pretty interesting as it led to some pretty interesting gameplay, really allowed the players to show off how much they knew about their fellow players by having to determine which players would get the majority of the votes. And afterwards, I like how Shubi had to single-handedly choose to block one of the people that had gone out of their way to vote for them in the competition, and I do feel like it worked out for them where Shubi votes out Bruno and Bruno decides to sort of call Shubi out during her farewell message, which in turn blows up Shubi's game. So I feel like it worked out a bit better than the producers were anticipating, but it's still an interesting concept. But really outside that, I feel like it's a largely standard season of The Circle, and I am kind of glad they don't rely as much on stunt casting that doesn't really matter, where yes, Shubi is a case of stunt casting, but at least he was an actual player within the game versus the Spice Girls in season 4, who are mainly just there to be a part of the drama for a bit, but not actually factor too much into the actual game. So I do feel like Shubi being a case of stunt casting is a step up. And for the most part, I feel like this game played out pretty streamlined, which I prefer over having all these done twists. But at the end of the day, I don't have too much to say about the production. And finally, I want to talk a bit about the gameplay from this season, which is a bit strange considering The Circle has never really been known for being that strategic of a game. And this season largely felt similar to that. However, I feel like there's a bit more going on compared to season 4, where you had some people at least try to play the game, and I feel like they had a bit more success in the game compared to someone like a Carol from season 4, where they were largely unsuccessful. I mean, you have Jennifer, for instance, like Brett and Xanthi, really trying to navigate the game strategically, and it sort of reminded me of Nick from season 3, although I feel like Jennifer definitely had a bit more bumpy roads, where they were obviously like using the hacker twist to try and get Sand to believe that Chaz heard from Tamira that Tamira was the one to create the newbie alliance, only for that to eventually blow up Jennifer's game once the 2 of them compare notes, and obviously by the end Jennifer really has no shot at winning. So I found that a bit underwhelming, but the fact that we had these players trying to play the game more strategically is something. Also felt like Shubi had a very interesting arc, and while Shubi plays pretty bad, it's still fun seeing him at least try to build his newbie alliance, only for it to blow up in his face. You also have Tom, who again was trying to play the game a bit more strategically by his alliance with Jennifer, and the 2 of them trying to gather information. And yes, well, Jennifer and Tom eventually end up on the bottom, and Tom ends up being taken out due to Jennifer voting strategically in that rating. It still was interesting seeing Tom play the game. And then there's Chaz, who definitely gets a lot of screen time about, you know, like the relationships and how this is a personal experience. However, if you look at the game, especially compared to Frank, I feel like Chaz was definitely more intentional with his game compared to Frank, to where Chaz was really like doing things that benefited his position within the game. And it's really crazy how, despite him being this big presence throughout the season and people recognizing that he's this big target, to the point where even Tamira and Jennifer are tanking him in the final 2 ratings, that Chaz still that's relatively close to winning, where really it's just Sam that edges him out due to these other players tanking Chaz in the ratings. And I feel like had Chaz won this season, that Chaz would probably be the best winner in the history of the circle, in my opinion, even topping Frank, who definitely dominated the game. However, I feel like Frank wasn't playing the game as actively as Chaz. So while it is disappointing that Chaz doesn't end up winning, the fact that he didn't do as bad in the final ratings as Nick from season 3 is at least something that I can praise about it. And then we have Sam, the winner of the season, who was definitely a step down gameplay wise compared to Chaz and Frank from the last season, as she was only influencer once during the season, and even then it was alongside Raven, who at that point had such a big vendetta against Marvin that it wasn't really that big of a gameplay move to take out Marvin in that round. But unlike people like Delisha or Trevor from season 2, I feel like Sam was in the core majority alliance for more of the game, where she had a very close bond with Chaz to the point where Chaz considered her his number one. And that is something I can praise about Sam's game, the fact that she was so close to the people running the game. And while she wasn't playing as strategically as someone like a Nick or arguably even a Chaz, the fact that she was in the majority alliance is impressive, and the fact that she gets to the end of the game and has enough good favor to ultimately win the game is something. Now, I do plan to do a winner ranking of the circle not too long from now, so we'll see how she ends up ranking there. But on the whole, while I would have preferred Chaz to win the game, I don't think Sam is necessarily a bad winner per se. So on the whole, I was still pretty underwhelmed by the level of gameplay and the increased focus on relationships and how people need to play genuinely. And we even see people actively reject alliances, which is pretty ridiculous in my view. But I still feel like compared to season 4, this was still a more strategic cast compared to that, and through that does elevate my enjoyment of the season to a degree, although at the end of the day, the circle is not that fun of a game from a gameplay standpoint, so I can't have it too high because of that. So on the whole, I do find this to be a bit of an improvement over season 4, both from a casting standpoint and from a gameplay standpoint. And while we haven't gotten any confirmation about future seasons to where this could potentially be the final season, I still feel like this season falls from a lot of the same pitfalls that other seasons of the circle have fallen into. And I really hope that if there is a season 6 down the road, that they do try to evolve the game a bit more. But as it is, this is a largely standard season of the show. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. Now I do want to do a winner ranking and season ranking of the circle moving forward, so you can stay tuned for that. I am also planning to cover other shows that are going to be starting up soon. We have a new season of Australian Survivor right around the corner, so I plan to do coverage of that. And of course, Survivor 44 is going to be starting soon, so you can stay tuned for coverage of that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.